It's really sad. And she kicks booties off. So today we got her like the balloon style ones, and it's hilarious. She's just like,
Alright, I did.
Yay, Kyle!
yay, Kyle!
What?
Okay.
Poor
So,
Kyle.
I know.
We're all like, sorry, that's
I can't help it. I can parallel park and I can open your pickle jar, but this now.
I was not happy.
Oh, you did a great job.
The headphones came off.
I know. It was
I knew it. I knew something was gonna happen. This damn live stream. Something so bad. Like I never would have thought about it. Okay, so if you go to the channel, there should be a link. I might actually be able to see it here. One person is already watching. Let's go.
We're not. Are we?
So we're not live.
Oh, like that.
Oh, Ross says we're lost.
Live now to watching.
Ross wrote me and was like, you're alive.
Thanks,
How did you
David.
We're live. Hi.
All right, guys, we're here. We did it.
Yeah.
Yay!
Welcome, everyone. All the technical difficulties are over. We are here live with Angelella Editorial. We're still running into some difficulties because clearly all my Google Hangout buttons are on here. So, you know, I am a professional streamer here, apparently. But we're going to get this thing working out as soon as I possibly can. But in the meantime, I'm Kyle V. Hiller, and I'm happy to have everybody here. And if everyone would like to take the time to introduce themselves while I finagle this screen around, that would be fantastic.
I'm Denise Santomaro. No,
I'm Diane
I
Telgen.
appreciate Angelella. My screen is a little slow, so I can kind of hear every third word everyone's saying, but
That's fair.
Hi everyone, I'm Suma Subramaniam.
Hey, I'm Jen Bailey.
I'm Jailer.
And we're just going to leave the buttons up there. So, all right. So let's move it along here. So for everyone who is new, Angelella Editorial, we are a fabulous, emphasis on fabulous, team of editors. And we are all working together to help make your fiction and nonfiction and picture book and all that fun stuff better. And on today's first live stream, we are going to chat about outlining. And we've got a series of questions. I'm going to bring up the chat now to make sure that I can take questions as we go along. And yeah, we're going to have a good time. So if Kate, if you want to kick it off with maybe the first question.
okay. Our first question for you is I'm going to be asking the editors what their opinions on everything, and hopefully we'll get some view style differences of opinion here. So what is the difference, guys, between a pantser and a plotter? Hopefully there's no difference of opinion on that.
I mean, I think it's and or make an outline. That's how I define it.
I agree with Denise. I think a plotter is someone who has a plan ahead of time and knows what's going to happen in a novel before they write it. And a pantser, on the other hand, is someone who has very little or no planning. They take on a novel as ideas come to them.
If you guys had mentioned too which one you are, I'm just curious. I feel like I could probably guess, but I would love to know.
Well, I'm a pantser, believe it or not.
You, Jen?
I would say I'm definitely more of that type. I like the story to take me. I found when I plot too much, I get bored. Story's done. Why bother writing it? I know how it ends. So I kind of like the surprise. I do aim for a certain area, but I often miss. So I consider myself a pantser.
And I am totally a plotter. I love spreadsheets. I love planning things. I find that anytime I try and pants, I get about 3 chapters in, and then I have to stop and plan everything out, or else I don't know where I'm going. And the one time I did kind of pants the whole thing, I ended up revising 50 million times. So I am in love with the outline.
And I used to be a pantser, and it was the most painful thing in the world. And I learned the error of my ways, and I became more of a plotter. But I still give myself the freedom to change my mind at any point in time. And so I will have my plan in place, but then as I'm writing, if an epiphany comes to me and I realize that I'm going to have to shift gears in the middle, I allow myself the freedom to be able to do that.
That's easier said than done, I feel like. Was there a specific project that you were working on that you realized your outline wasn't, or pantsing wasn't working out for you? Was it, at what point did you turn it around?
In fact, one of the novels that I was working on, I had done, I don't know, it was probably the 7th or 8th revision, and I went, this is just not working for me. And, you know, it had been years. I'd never learned how to plot. Just did what felt natural. And it was an unmitigated disaster. And so the final product became something that looks absolutely nothing like what I originally started with all those years ago. I mean, if you looked at the first draft that I started with versus the draft that I have today, you would not even know that they were the same story, that they had even the same kernel of an idea at any point in time. And you just kind of have to give yourself that permission to say, this needs to change, and be okay with that.
I feel like if I know my character, I can plot. If I go into a story with just sort of a vague idea of something, I can't plot because I don't know what my character is going to do. I often find it by pantsing. And so it's like if I don't do the work before, and sometimes I don't want to do the work before. Sometimes I think you guys have all heard me say at one point or another, that's a future Denise problem. She'll deal with that later. But if I know my character going into a story, I feel like I can actually plot because I have an idea of how they might respond to things, how they might change based on this event happens. I think knowing your character is a huge part of knowing whether or not you can plot something in advance or if you have to pants it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point because that is one of the things that happened that made me realize, oh, I have to change this, was that I learned something about my character as I continued to write that I went, oh, this would never happen. She would not do this. And so I had to completely change what I thought when I was planning what I thought she was going to do. And that just it just had to happen that way, that change had to happen, and I had to be okay with allowing that change. I mean, it really is true that your characters determine the where your story goes. You don't determine it, your characters determine it. And if your characters tell you something has to change, then something has to change. So
it's interesting. So I am my current very naked work in progress that I'm still in the middle of drafting. I started out with a character and a situation for that character, and I had no idea what the plot would be. So I tried using Lisa Krohn's Wired for Story. I mean, her Story Genius, which is based on Wired for Story, as a way of exploring how create a plot based on what matters to the character and how the character acts. And it's been a really interesting experiment so far. I'm still drafting, but so I've got room to play, but I feel better knowing that I have a general idea of a plot that is growing from what my character is.
And I would agree with that. As I said, it's like I try to at least have some distant aim, you know, because otherwise, what are you writing to? So I try to definitely have a goal, a story goal at the end, but my path is usually meandering.
Yeah, I found that a certain amount of planning has really gone a long way. For my most recent project, I decided that I'll spend 3 months plotting it because I'm a pantser too, trying to be a plotter. And I wrote down some ideas and put them in a separate journal and outlined some of the chapters. And I'm in the process of developing character worksheets for mine for the project. And I also found Lisa Krohn's Story Genius extremely helpful. And also some of the side writing exercises in Donald Mars's Emotional Craft of Fiction have been extremely helpful in terms of developing, in terms of finding out what emotions every chapter need to convey.
So I think working with clients on an author coaching basis, for those of you who offer author coaching, sometimes that can be a really good starting point. How would you recommend a client move forward who has had struggles with outlining in the past? Is that something that you feel like a part that you can skip over when you're starting a new work in progress, or what would you recommend?
I think if you're going to skip over it, the beginning of a project is the best to skip over it. Because once you get to revision, once you get to revising it, you need to understand the structure, right? You need to have an understanding of what that looks like and actually manipulate what's happening throughout the story. I don't know. I think of them as two different things, right? Like brain, and for me, outlining goes along with it. When you're starting a story, there's kind of a little bit of a magic that happens, which is, I think, why I like to pants and why I understand the desire to do that, because you want to play. It's the time you get to play, you know, and later you have to try to follow those pieces fit together. But initially, sometimes that's the fun. Just playing around with how things might turn out with the idea in mind of, okay, at a certain point, we'll sit down with an outline.
It's like the first blush of love, right? I mean, it's like when you fall in love, it's like, you're going to go ahead and try everything. Huh? I mean, you know, you just
play Paris. Yes, of course.
You get wrapped up in the whirlwind, and you know, you don't meet the person and decide, all right, in 3 months we're going to go. You know, I think that it's kind of that. Let's feel each other out and see if this is worth pursuing.
So does that make marriage the second draft or the revision?
I call revising. Revising is my serious relationship, and my drafting in the morning, which I do every day in a journal for 15 minutes. That's my secret boyfriend project. Tell my husband.
You're fair.
So what's one of the first things?
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to look at it. That you should be able to play around, but you also have to understand the structure. So you can ignore the structure and you can ignore the rules, so to speak, but you should also understand the rules. So if I'm going to be working with a client, and I might say to the client, look, you don't have to do this. You don't have to outline. You don't have to do any of these things, but understand why some people do. Understand why they work. And so I might suggest, okay, go get fill in the blank plotting by Linda George, or go get this book, or go get 20 master plots by Ronald Tobias, or, you know, I might suggest different books and just say, just read them. And I might even pull out specific chapters that I want them to read and just say, just understand it. You don't have to do it, but just so that they know why it could help them along the process, or just to help them in the revision process. Because like you said, it will help them later on, even if they just have in the back of their mind why these things work. So, yeah.
Well, and I wonder, I mean, I think there are lots of different ideas about plot, right? I think that you can go, I've done down to like, this scene happens, this scene happens, this scene happens in a chapter, and plot it out in that way. But there's also like, I know my midpoint, you know, and I know my 3 major plot points, and I know my ending. And so I think that also finding out, trying a lot of different things, part of the fun, right, for me at least, I think, and I think I've seen in students I've worked with and clients I've worked with, is this idea of play.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if something's going to work for you unless you try it.
Right.
Now, try the outline is every single scene, you know what it's going to be in advance. Try the outline where you know like 3 points where you know you're going to get to eventually. Or if you've never done it, and I think that it depends on the person, right? Like there's some people who have the structure in their head that it has to be done in this way. I think I would almost encourage that person to try pantsing. You know, try the opposite. You might find something comes out in your writing that you wouldn't have experienced otherwise, because you've always done it in this way.
That's what I think side writing is good for. I think of side writing as being a form of pantsing. You're deliberately taking yourself out of the formal planning that you've done, and you're really you're purposely pulling yourself out of that and trying to ignore all that planning and just having that fun that you're talking about, Denise. I think that's a perfect example of how to do that. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about what defines side writing?
Yeah.
A lot of times. Oh,
Go ahead, Jen.
Okay. A lot of times I have found with clients, I'll encourage them to try writing that they haven't tried. A lot of times it's poetry, where they don't think that they can go there. But I find poetry to be incredibly freeing. And so it might be write a poem from the second character's point of view about the first character, about your main character. Just to give them different ways of looking. And oftentimes they find out that their second character has been flat, needs to get more well-rounded, or they find out some hidden flaw in the main character. And so side writing to me is just, it usually is a way to get to understand your characters better. And I try to encourage them to do it in a form that is uncomfortable, because then they cannot lean on their strengths. They are forced to work through their weaknesses.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah, and they may or may not make it to the novel, but it's for the writer to know.
I think it's almost sometimes more effective if you know going in that this is not going to see the light of day. No one's going to see it, because then you can free yourself up from the need to get it perfect or to have it make sense with anything else that's happening.
Right, and if we don't have an active roadmap and we don't have to plan, we can just side write and do what works for us and just write. It's not set in stone, and we could approach side writing with or without an agenda.
I feel like a lot of times when I'm reviewing opening pages of works with clients, a lot of times I will point out, okay, there's information that you need to know as the author, but maybe the reader doesn't need to know it as the reader. And that's the kind of thing you would do in side writing, is explore character and backstory and things you need to know to make your characters three-dimensional that you need to know, but maybe your reader doesn't need to know.
I think I sometimes love side writing a little too much. Oh, sorry, Kyle, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Please.
No, you go ahead.
I insist you go ahead.
What a gracious host.
No, I was just going to say, I sometimes think I like it a little too much, because I'm like, I can just, again, the whole idea of play. I think I'm always coming back to how I can make it fun, and I can encourage the people I deal with to make it fun, because it's not fun while we're doing it.
Yeah, I think it's important that people write for themselves a little bit more, because I think we definitely live in an industry where we're so focused on making sure the book is going to sell, right? And cutting out all the things, or not paying so much attention to all the details and things like that. And a lot of that stuff gets by the wayside. But those are the things that we really care about, or that we really want to indulge in, because we love our characters, we love their situations, and we love their relationships with each other. And we want to build that. And that's great. And I feel like that ends up in the writing, maybe more thematically, and maybe more in the minute, subtle details, which I think is cool. So I definitely am all for the side writing. But I'm definitely a plotter. Who knows? What are some of the things that the plotters in the house? What's the first thing you try to do when you approach a story? What's one of the first things you try to tackle with an outline?
I need to know the emotional journey. I mean, where am I going with this? You know, what does this mean to my main character? What does it mean to me? Because if I'm going to spend all this time writing it and revising it, it's got to mean something to me. So once I know, you know, what I want it to mean and what I want to say and what it means to the character, then I have to pick out, okay, what are the events that are going to reveal this journey? And, you know, so I can start with a situation and a character and write for 3 chapters, but if I don't know where it's going after then it's, you know, that's not something I'm going to keep working on. If I can't drive a whole plot from those first 3 chapters, if I can't predict where it's going to go, then a lot of times I'll put that aside and pick one of the other ideas I've got.
Yeah, and for me, I start with, I'll get an idea for, ooh, this situation sounds like it would make a really good story. And then I will build my characters first. So, I start with the situation and then I work on all my character sketches. And I build the main character and the main secondary characters, whoever they happen to be, and I usually have a pretty good idea of who those are. And then if there are any important tertiary characters, I will build those in as well. And those are the ones that I start with. And that can take me a long time. That can take me weeks, or maybe even a couple months to do that. And I will do that before I even start, the plot outline. And then I do a very skeletal plot outline first before I start doing, the David Gill Post-it note plot outline or anything like that. So, yeah, for me, it's a very, very heavy character development.
So how do you go about that conversation with your clients? What about the writers that you work with that are, that may be pantsers or whatever, or they're just maybe resistant to saying, hey, I want to change these things, but I don't want to outline. What's sort of what are the conversations that you have with writers when it comes to the big discussion about you need to outline?
Well, I'm not sure you necessarily need to outline, but you do need to impose some kind of structure. So if I'm working with a client and they've pantsed the whole thing, I might analyze it chapter by chapter and say, hey, is something happening in this chapter? I think it's useful, even if you generate the whole thing by pantsing, to outline it after the fact. And that way you can look at issues of pacing. You can look, do all these scenes need to be here? Because something has to happen in every scene. There has to be some kind of change in the character emotion. And if that doesn't happen, I think it's easier to see it if you create an outline than it is, it gives you, an outline gives you a quick overview. So it's kind of a shortcut to analyzing what's the pacing and the structure of my novel. And, it will tell you if something is not happening.
Right. Reverse engineering approach is a really smart way to go about it. And anybody who's ever actually been asked the question, what's your novel about, after writing the novel, and you just kind of sit there and go, oh shit, what's my novel about? Reverse engineering can be really helpful. What were you going to say, Jen?
I was just going to agree with Diane that, once it pants that sucker out, and actually I just was talking with a client and came up with this. I wanted every chapter, every vignette, because it was more of a vignette story, to him to have it there on the Post-it. And I said, now think about it like a string of beads, like you're trying to create a pattern or of a necklace or something like that. And now you might be moving those vignettes around, and then you're going to have to worry about your transitions and all the rest of it. But now it's time to give it a form. You've got your pieces. It's all maybe it's like putting together a quilt. Where you need to, at some point, you need to start creating.
Jen, did you want him to make a necklace or a quilt? One or the other. Pick one.
I don't make either, so I don't. I wanted him to make a really good dry martini.
Make a scarf.
Oh, this poor guy.
I totally agree. I think of it in science terms, right? Like I think of it by the bones. Like the body's not going to stand without the bones. So what are the bones? If you don't have any bones, the body's just going to be like, this is going to sound gross, but like lumpy flesh on the floor. Like it's like you need bones to actually support that structure. And I also think science is a great way to come in, and like psychology of patterns and understanding that we follow patterns and we understand structure, and we want that as when we're consuming any type of story, whether it's on television or in film or in a book, that structure, because it helps us get to those emotions. And so if we don't have the structure, sometimes it can be hard to allow ourselves to fall into those emotional places with our characters.
Right.
Yeah, I think the main thing is you have to help your client recognize that their story needs to, the plot of their story needs to overlay a plot graph somehow. You know, they need to match a plot graph in some form. So if you give them a plot graph and you say, make this match up, you know, even if you're not gonna outline, you know, you still have to recognize that there is a structure to a story, and you know, you can be a pantser and still make this work. And it's a matter of, you know, like you said, Kate, reverse engineering, but it still has to work. There's just because you don't necessarily follow a very organized way of doing it in the beginning doesn't mean that you can't make it work as a pantser.
And I think most of us would agree that a story has to have a character arc. If you have a character that doesn't change or grow in any way, it's not going to be satisfying to the reader. So at the very least, you need to map out that character arc of change and growth. And that's going to correspond pretty closely to the plot arc as well.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Samantha Harris
I
in the
think
chat
also,
says,
I think also I would encourage the writer to think about what and you know, just the means to create a powerful emotional experience for the reader in the novel, because that is the most important thing. And what do they want the reader to feel deeply as they read the novel through every chapter? And thanks to Martine Levitt, she gave us the concept of desire lines. And
Right.
you know, so what does the main character want to physically accomplish or gain by the end of the story? This is so important. And once they know that, they will know what the main character wants emotionally and what is her emotional arc. And it'll be easier to discover the events of the book that will change him or her through the course of the story.
So, looks like we have some comments that I wanted to read off before we jump into the next topic. Samantha Harris says that she's a romance writer and she usually starts with the meet cute. How my couple will enter each other's lives, sometimes even before I know their names, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
And I think that whole meet cute thing, I think, has a lot to do with just the emotional impact of something that the characters might have experienced in the backstory that really drives the story forward, which I think is cool. David Fay says, or Fi, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, David. I do it all in my head like a maniac and then outline and strategize for the revision. Also, in reference to not having your skeletons, he preferred the word goo. And then he also left in a couple more comments. Pantsing is like dumping all the puzzle pieces out of the box and onto the table, turning them all image side up and sorting them, maybe even putting some of the edges together. Eventually, you need a plan to fill in the hole. I think that's a really cool way to look at it. It's just thinking of taking all your goo and taking it, transforming it into a puzzle and just outlining it. Because whenever you do a puzzle, you don't start from the middle. You sort of start from the outline. And I think there is a lot to think about what that actual frame is of the outside of the puzzle. Because, I mean, that's what everybody does when they start a puzzle. So if that works, then there's no reason why structuring an outline the right way is not something to not do. Because we romanticize our writing so much and all that other stuff, but are we really trying to build a story here, or are we just trying to throw up some words on the page because we're in our feelings, right? So what happens if you outline and then inspiration strikes you and you take the story in a totally different direction? what do you do with your outline? How do you change it? How do you modify it? Do you start from scratch? What happens when you've got this brand new inspiration?
Yes, you start from scratch. I can attest to that. Been there, done that. Like I said, you know, the novel that I actually did that. It is a 100% completely different novel. My characters' names changed. There's virtually nothing that's the same, and that was almost this, you know, bang my head on the table moment of, I need to start over and, you know, do like Cynthia Leidick Smith does and just throw the draft out the window and start from scratch and just, you know, realize that there's no point in going backward. There's no point in salvaging anything. And it was okay, because what I came out with on the other side is something much stronger and much better. And there was a reason that that change happened, even though I had planned all this out and I had, you know, I had realized, well, to be fair, I had pantsed a whole lot first. Then I realized I needed to plot. And then I came to another shift where I had to change again. So, you know, this novel is like my novel from hell, but it is a lot stronger, and it made sense to do that. I resisted and resisted and resisted, and once I said I give in, it just, everything started to flow. So I just had to go with it.
Anyone else? Inspiration? What do you do? Killing darlings?
I mean, killing your darlings. I feel like anytime you're working on a story, and it doesn't matter if you're pantsing it or you're plotting it, and you find it taking a turn you didn't expect, yeah, you have to rework it. And if you are a plotter, that means you change the rest of your outline and then write the end. And if you're an pantser, that means you go back and change everything. I mean, the one novel that I essentially pants the whole thing. It started as a NaNoWriMo novel, and it was horrible. I wrote it in the form of encyclopedia entries, and it had absolutely no structure. And so it took a lot of work. And what I ended up doing is what Jay refers to, is instead of going into the meat of all this, you know, the 50,000 plus words I'd done, I kind of put that aside. I opened up a new file and said, okay, here's my structure. I'm only going to copy the bits that work from the old stuff, but I'm starting anew. So, you know, it really depends on how you like to work. If you are someone like me where it physically hurts you to delete your darlings, then maybe you want to be a plotter. And if you are like, oh, well, it's just words, then pantsing can work for you. It's all what works for you.
But I think that you do have to take, as you say, you have to disassemble. You have to take down the structure. Otherwise, you end up with a Frankenbook. And I have a Frankenbook.
Don't we all have Frankenbooks? Come on.
Because there was like, no way am I going to get rid of that. That's gold. It's gold, I tell you. And and yet when you add that gold to the, you know, to the brass, no. It don't bind well. It just doesn't work. It's like, no. So you really do, I think, have to rethink. I like Diane. I have a special file that I can go on sad days and visit all of my brilliance and think someday I'll have a use for that, which I won't, but that's okay.
You never know.
Deleted scenes file.
You never know. It's true.
But yeah, you have to deconstruct. You have to be willing to say goodbye, at least for now, and start again.
I mean, I will say there is one character of mine that has basically been killed off as a darling in every single story I've written, and I'm waiting for that magical day where she's finally in one of my books. And so far, not so good.
Maybe she needs to be the book. She's the book.
Maybe. I think so. I mean, at some point she's going to have to be. But, I mean, maybe, I don't know. she's just gonna have to wait. And good things come to those who wait, including for our characters in our scenes. So there's that.
I have a line.
Really interesting.
I have a line from a college short story that I wrote. And, I was in college years ago. And so I still remember this line, and I can't get rid of it. I can't, like, someday it will come back and it will be in the perfect spot. So I know how you feel, Kyle.
I guess I have like a goldfish memory because I feel like what I have to say is so important at the time. And I cut it and I paste it into that special file, and then I never ever go back to it. I'm like, a day later, I'm like, what was it that I was crying about having to cut the other day? I don't even know.
That's a good thing. It preserves you from these memories of that perfect line from your college short story.
From college.
You will never have the pain that I have.
I remember writing in a draft for Kekla and I'd written an entire chapter just to get in one line. and she totally nailed me on it. She was like, yeah, no. And she goes, well, I know why you did it, because you wanted to be able to say, and it was like, yeah, that's why I did it. And and I'm really glad that happened to me early in my life, because I don't do that anymore.
That's what a good editor will do. They will call you on your bullshit. I definitely have had clients respond to my edit letters with, can't you just let me get away with anything?
No, we can't. No, we're not supposed to. That's why they hired us. They're looking for someone to call them on their bullshit.
Yeah, we could, but then you aren't getting your money's worth if we do.
That's right.
Yes, yeah.
Samantha Harris in the chat wants to know what that line was.
Yeah,
I know me too.
I want to know what it is.
I think we have to indulge,
Then we should all put it in all of our novels. Go ahead, Jay, say
it.
She's talking about you. She's talking
no,
about
not me.
you, isn't she?
Oh,
me?
Yeah, you.
Of course, you, Jen.
Oh my gosh. I can't even remember it. It was to make a stupid ass pun. Excuse my language. It was just to make some dumb pun. And I don't even remember what it was.
That's so funny.
I understand completely. I love bad puns, and they're a weakness of mine, so I understand, but good on her for calling you out.
Yeah, and anyone who says that puns are the lowest form of humor, no, I absolutely disagree. I think puns are, you have to be really smart to make certain puns. Because sometimes I will make puns and I will get these open mouth breather people looking at me going, what?
But I feel like puns are the lowest form. It's kind of like,
Kyle,
listen,
we're going
hear me out. As a master of punnery, okay? It's like when you have a basket of French fries in front of you, or you're like, oh, look at that beautiful steak over there. It's like, that's cool, but I really want French fries. That's how puns are. So go for the French fries. Steak is overrated. High humor is overrated.
As a vegetarian, I will agree with you.
Also a vegetarian. That's why I said steak.
Okay.
Full circle.
Okay, but also just French fries. Like, always choose the French fries.
Always
choose
the French fries.
Always choose the French fries.
And eat them while they're warm. When that pun comes to you, just let it spit right out. And, sometimes you get the blank looks, and the people who appreciate it, are true. They're true, your kindred spirits.
That's right.
You wanted to see what a blank
Old
look.
Lines and darlings are cold French fries. Is that the conclusion you can come to?
This metaphor has some serious legs.
Listen, that's why we write.
We can draw out a pun.
We can keep going and going and going forever and ever and ever.
Oh.
But you probably don't have enough time for that. So,
okay.
What when it comes to the actual outlines, because I think there's really no right way, maybe, to write an outline, what is essential for an outline to work? Outside of, I know we've talked a lot about what goes into it, and fair enough. But what needs to be in an outline, and how does someone make it so that it's not too superfluous and it's not too into the details of it all, and it just gives you the bare bones? This is what needs to happen. Do you need to go lean, or do you need to be detailed, and what do you look for in order to go one way or the other?
I mean, personally, I like a lean outline because it allows you a bit of freedom while you're writing. Just the basic, a couple sentences. This is what needs to happen in this chapter. If that is too much for you, I think at the very least, I'll say it a million times. You need to outline what is the character's journey. What is their transformation? What are they learning? How are they growing? And because if you can't articulate that, then what's the point of your story?
Well, I would say that it's important to get the big picture for every chapter in the beginning. And for some chapters, it's possible to get into complex emotions, but most of the time it's challenging to get to those raw emotions that are underneath. And they only come out from multiple rounds of revision. So I would just run with it like a pantser would do.
Yeah, I think the basic, you have to have the basics. And if you're really unsure about what needs to be in an outline, do a Google search for a basic plot graph and just make sure that you have those main plot points in your outline. Just make sure that each of those the plot arc, because it goes up, it goes a little bit down, it goes up, all those main plot points have to be on your outline if you're going to try one. That's what I would say. That's the minimum.
I know where the story's going.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jen.
I was just, because I guess I see those as more like, and Diane hit on it, it's questions that I'm answering. So I guess I don't see it so much as an outline as there's a question there, and now I have an answer. And a lot of times, because I need to be tactile, I do it in a bubble chart kind of form. I wonder if I've got a book here. So I'll put in connections, and I don't even know if I've got something that I can. Probably not. But it's yeah. I make charts. I make bubblescapes, I guess, for lack of a better term, and show how things kind of connect together, and that helps me see it.
So you're kind of doing like the snowflake method, right? Is that?
I don't know if it's. Oh,
and I don't mean that in the derogatory term.
Right. But like, okay, so I don't know if that, but that probably isn't even showing up. But it's like just things that lead to other things that lead to other things that come off of those big questions. What's the lie the main character believes? How is that going to be proved to them to be a lie? Not so much as we saw it in our elementary years of, capital I, A, da-da-da-da-da. But yes, I definitely have questions that I'm telling myself to answer.
I find it really useful to think of them like internal versus external, and like separate them out so that you're thinking about what is that internal journey and how is that impacting the external journey. For me, if I try to think of them as one, it like messes up my brain a little bit, And I find that that desire line, right? And then thinking about how is that impacting the physical, tangible things that are happening up here. And so for me, I agree with Diane, knowing what that desire line is. Where's your character starting? Where do you want them to end up? And if you want them to end up over here, and they're kind of stuck here, how do you get them like back over here? But knowing where you want your character to end, I can't remember it, but somebody said like emotionally where you want your character to be, where you want your audience to be at the end. And so thinking about building that desire line, and then that can then form, that external arc that's happening above it.
So David has some more comments. I feel like we're best friends at this point.
Pretty great.
Outlines are not sidewalks. If you put cement in that thing, you'll end up stuck ankle deep in it. I agree. I've stepped in cement once, and that was not fun. I missed those shoes. In my delirium, he adds, I wrote an outline, and then I wrote a book, and they looked as alike as Jeff Goldblum and Alan Cuban. And that almost worked, and that was really beautiful. And I want to thank David for that. That was beautiful. We are best friends. We are best friends. So it is confirmed. I made a new best friend on a Monday night. It is excellent. I'm having a great time. So where do you do your outlining? Do you do it in Scrivener? Do you do it in Word? Do you do it on...
I'm sorry. I was really thinking, like, in the bath. I mean, who doesn't outline
that too. I mean,
that's where I get a lot of my ideas, you know. Listen, I actually have a waterproof notebook.
Just get a bath bomb and a glass of wine. You know, make sure the water's extra hot because you're going to be in there for a while if you're outlining.
That's right.
And then just go to town, and you'll have an outline by the time you're pruning. It's fine. It's totally fine.
You know, I think there's a lot to be said about working by hand.
Yeah.
And when for me, outlining is a form of brainstorming. And I just feel like your brain works differently when you're writing with a pencil or a pen on paper than you are on your computer. And the other benefit is when you're working on your computer, you have to think linearly because you're scrolling down in different places. But if you were writing on paper, like the bubble outline that Jen was showing us, you could go here, there, everywhere, just sprinkle your ideas around and then, figure out where they go. And I mean, that's where you can also bring the Post-its. That's another version that I've used where you put scenes on different Post-its and then you can rearrange them where you eventually figure out that they're going to fit. But I think for me, outlining is play. I love outlining because trying to figure out, oh, this could happen and then this could happen and then which order does it happen? Oh, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
The spreadsheets come later and that's the extra fun.
I do kind of a combination. I start in a notebook and I just take notes on my general ideas of what I think is going to happen, and it's sort of journaling, I guess. And then once I get a better idea of where I think I'm going, then I will do a Scrivener outline. And then when I have a draft of the story and I'm ready to start revising, that's when I actually have like one of those big poster boards that, all middle school students have to do a project on. I have a poster board on my wall that has a plot graph. And that's when I will use my Post-its and I start moving my Post-its around. And I start figuring out, do they need to move like that? Like that. That's exactly, yes, that's what I have. So, it just, to me, I need several different ways to outline in several different phases of the process.
But I love journals. I think that's a problem.
I'm with you, Diane. I'm with you. I have a basket full of them.
Look at their.
I use really large paper. I don't know why. I do work better on the floor, and so I get like easel paper, and I just and pencils. Gosh, you gotta love a pencil.
I feel like I encourage people I'm working with to what did you like about school? I loved all the different colors, like different markers, and to just like this,
like my microplane markers.
I love those things.
Yes. I think my favorite part about outlining is Max. And I think so much money. But I think money goes back to that idea of what you were saying, Diane, about play and like what is exciting and fun for you. I think it goes back to like, especially if you're working on a novel, man, it is so long. You were working on that thing for so long. Like find the things that keep you coming back to it, that get you excited about it, that like make you have fun. Like having a billion different colors and being about being able to pull out a new thing of Post-its.
Yes.
My favorite thing about school was dress down day, so I don't know how
Me too, Kyle.
I'll make it work.
Now that we're writers, every day is dress down day.
That's true. That is true.
I mean, let's be real. Who's wearing sweatpants? Right.
That's right. I was going to say, nobody stand up. We all look all right.
The white stuff. I think what's really interesting about this conversation so far is that for anybody who knows these people having this crazy conversation, it's so...
Hi, David.
Hi, David.
It correlates so strongly to everybody's personality, the way that they outline or don't, how they start their projects. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So I know that Suma had some thoughts on, she has just come back from ALA, and she has some arcs that she'd be willing to give away to our viewers. So for anybody interested in winning any of the arcs that Suma has, Suma, can you tell us what you'll be giving away?
Yeah, I have Rules for Visiting by Jessica Francis Kane coming out from Penguin. I also have Lovely War from Julie Berry.
Hey.
Oh, I'm so jealous. Can I be one of the viewers? I want to be a viewer.
Yeah, and I have a third one, which is Over the Moon by Natalie Lloyd. You know who Natalie Lloyd is. She is the New York Times bestseller of A Snicker of Magic. So 3 good arcs.
Awesome. And I just want to point out very quickly to plug Kyle a little bit that Kyle was an editor that worked on Lovely War a little bit. So we are going to, I'll give you a round of verbal applause.
Yay!
Very excited for you.
Fantastic job.
I know. It's very exciting.
Yeah, and it's a great book, and I'm really excited for that one. So someone's really lucky today.
Okay, so we have these 3 wonderful arcs that Suma is generous enough to give away. For anybody interested in winning those arcs that is watching right now, please DM us on Twitter or Facebook and let us know that you'd like to be considered. Subscribe to our website, or subscribe to our newsletter, and you will automatically be entered to win.
And while you're out there subscribing, you should subscribe to the YouTube channel. Even though I'm supposed to plug that later, but that's fine. Just want to put that out there since we're throwing the word subscribe out. It's like an impulse, but I apologize. But yeah, subscribe to the newsletter for that, because it's an awesome book. All of them are awesome. So
you can never have too much angel editors in your life, essentially, is what we're saying.
it's only a matter of time before we take over the world.
I feel like that's very true.
And then we're going to revise it and outline it. And then we'll be outliners. And we'll all have spreadsheets and markers. And it'll be dress down day forever.
Yeah, we're just going to stay in the tub and do it there.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure that's the way everybody wants to live in reality.
Yes.
We're doing a service for the whole world.
Yep.
So to wrap it up, what do we recommend to our watchers out here, the viewers, the audience, as far as craft books that you'd recommend that touch on outlining or starting a new projects?
This is one of my favorites. Yeah, This is one of my favorites. If you're just starting out, I think this is one of my favorites. It's called Fill in the Blank Plotting by Linda George. I think this is a really good one for getting a handle on how to outline. I think this is great. This is another one that I recommend to newbies. It's called 20 Master Plots and How to Build Them by Ronald Tobias. So another really good one for newbies. This also like a must-have. It's called, here, let me zoom in a little bit. The Scene Book by Sandra Schofield. Okay, another great one. This one is also just absolutely must-have on every writer's bookshelf. Self-Editing for Fiction Writers by Rennie Brown and Dave King. So those are my must-haves.
Well, Diane told me to get this one. And she was not wrong. Because after I got this, I ended up getting to go to the office supply store, which is always a yay. And I got me one of the big orange ones, and I'm actually doing something I haven't done for a really long time. I'm underlining stuff. So that's great. This Story Genius by Lisa Cron is fantastic.
Yeah, I like Story Genius for, if you want to do character-based plotting and you don't really have an idea of what's going to happen in your novel, you have an idea for a character and a situation. I also love her book that came out before that called Wired for Story, because it explains all the brain science about how we process stories and why we want characters that are active and why we want things to happen. Because I am just that kind of a geek that I just love the science behind it. And it's like, ooh, oh, so yes, if you work with me, I will be telling you, yes, this is why your characters have to do things, and something has to happen, and they have to want something, because our brains, that's how we process story. That's how we make sense of the world, and that's why we love to read, because we're assuming other lives and trying out other experiences, and so a story has to have something happen, and that's a great book that explains why.
Since Ross isn't here to say it, I'll throw out there that getting screenwriting books is also a really awesome resource for outlining. There's quite a few out there he knows them better than I do, and my brain is totally losing them. But there's quite a few out there.
Story by Robert McKee.
That's a great one.
And then there's Dialogue by Robert McKee, which happens to be right here.
Yeah.
Maybe not about your outlining, but it's definitely one to have.
Save
I really
the Cat.
enjoy Creating Character Arcs by Kim Whalen. It's a good book when you start thinking about
That's a good one,
and stuff
too.
like that. I think that's really essential. So I got some other books too, but they are in the other room, so I'm kind of tethered here. So, but yeah, those are some great recommendations.
This one's fun. It's maybe not so much on outlining, but it's a Telling Lies for Fun and Profit by Lawrence Block. It's a collection of columns that he wrote for Writer's Digest some time ago, and they hold up very well.
Well, I certainly recommend The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Maas. This is particularly important. I think it's a great book for side writing and creating an emotional response that forces us to make our characters change.
I would also encourage writers too to actually pay attention when they're reading of when they notice plot points happening. I'll often do this when I'm reading on an e-reader, of looking down when I think like a midpoint has happened, and seeing through the book, I know something's about to change, and being able to look at it and actually studying the actual fiction I'm reading too as well.
David Fay in the chat recommends Words for Pictures by Brian Michael Bendis. Even though it's comic focused, still offers a lot of insight. Did somebody mention Wonder Book by Jeff Vandermeer? I can't remember.
I love that book.
That is a great book.
It's a great book, especially if you're doing fantasy or sci-fi or any kind of speculative fiction and world building. That's a wonderful book.
Yeah, and Vandermeer wrote Annihilation, which I'm reading now, and holy crap, this book's so good. So.
I also just want to put into this conversation a little bit of
She's
freezing.
She froze. We lost Kate, everyone. We lost.
Oh
Kate.
no, Kate.
Wait, she's back.
She's back.
I think. This could be past Kate.
Well, future Kate's not going to be happy about that.
No, not at all.
No.
I hate it when future Kate
Wait,
gets
what
on
am I not
stream.
going to be happy about?
You were frozen for a while.
We missed you.
Yeah. So we thought you were taken over by future Kate. So.
Damn it. I just wanted to say. Wait, am I still here?
No, you're good.
You're still there.
Okay.
You're still there.
I just wanted to say that as an editor, I do really like reading the craft books, but as a writer, I get super overwhelmed, and I can't do it. Like too many voices, too many people telling me what to do, and I freeze, and then I forget why I'm writing at all. So, as an editor who studies craft to help other people understand it, I see the merit in it. As a writer who gets easily overwhelmed and influenced by other people's thoughts and ideas, I have to step away from craft books.
Yeah, I think a good practice is to look at whatever movies or read whatever books that are really close to what it is that you're writing, and just revisit that, and that'll refresh in your mind what it is that you're trying to do with the story and things like that. Because I think we can get really lost in trying to build plot and outlining and all that other stuff, especially because we're so anxious to write, and I think it's really easy to forget why you're writing. So definitely keep in your back pocket that movie, that book, or whatever it is that inspired you, to just revisit it, and revisit it often, even if it's every week when you have to, because that's one thing that I do whenever I'm outlining. I pick my 1 or 2 comps for my book, and I just will watch them every week before I sit down and just really get into my outline, and it really helps a lot, actually. So,
and that's actually a good point. If you're not sure what craft book is the right for you, and you feel intimidated, take a book or a movie that you really love, and you just adore how it works, and outline that. That's a way to learn. If you want to learn about how outlining works, try outlining a book that you love and explore how it works that way. And maybe that's what's gonna give you the jump start into figuring out, oh, this is how a story works.
Yeah, I've never been one to read a craft book from beginning to end. It's like I always found that I would dip into them, to a chapter here or something there. But this one, the Story Genius, I actually am, although I've stopped now. But anyway, because I got too much stuff. I got too much stuff in my head, and. But what I do with it is read it and then just let it sit back there. It's like, so you've got it as knowledge. You've got it in the back of your head. And then when you start writing, I don't worry about the craft book so much unless I get stuck.
Yeah. That's great. So we're going to wrap it up at this point. It's been great. If we could kind of go around the room and everyone can kind of plug, where we can find you online and all that other stuff. We can start with Suma and go to.
Thank you. It's you can find me on Twitter. I'm Suma_V for Victor _S for Sierra.
Okay. And Kate.
And you can find me on AngelellaEditorial.com or at Kate Angelella on Twitter.
Jay.
I am at jwhistler on Twitter or jwhistler.com.
Jen.
Jen Bailey on Twitter because, I was on Twitter that long ago. That I am Jen Bailey. And I'm jenbailey.com. And can I say one more thing? Oh, starting at the end of February, you can find my ass on your bookshelves too. What?
Yeah.
Yes.
Get
it. Diane?
I am at dianetelgen.com, and you can find me on Twitter at originalneglet, because someone stole my online presence, my online neglet.com. They have They took the name, they made one post, and they haven't posted in 10 years, and Twitter won't give me that handle. So I am the original Maglet.
And Denise, even though I'm not sure you're there, because we just see your little shadow avatar icon thing. I think we might have lost her.
Well, Denise is definitely on AngelellaEditorial.com, so if you're looking for her, you might be able to find her Twitter there too.
Yeah, I can't remember her Twitter off the top of my head. She's new to Twitter, so definitely go find her and give her some love.
She's in our all the editors are in our bio of our Angelella Editorial Twitter, I believe.
You can find me at Kyle Literally on Twitter and Instagram. I'm also at KyleVHiller.com if you want to read all my stuff too, because I'm definitely a writer as well.
And We Casual Misfits.
Oh yeah, and my podcast, Casual Misfit Radio, which you can find at We Casual Misfits on Twitter and WeCasualMisfits.com. You can also listen in on iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud, and soon to be Spotify. You can find all of us at AngelaEditorial.com or also on Twitter at AngelEditors. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which we put out maybe every 2 weeks or so, or whenever we have something to announce. And yeah, subscribe to our YouTube, because we'll be hopefully going live maybe sometime soon, maybe sometime later. Definitely had a lot of fun hanging out with everybody here in the chat and with all you. And yeah, it's Monday, and it's a great day to get to some writing and get to some revising. So thank you, everyone, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Later, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.